My name is Gregory Gorman. I just finished the Masters in Applied Psychology at UCC. So the module took place in the academic year, the first semester of the academic year 2020 and 2021, and that was during the lockdown as well. The community involved was the Cork Migrant Centre, and I'm much more familiar with the Cork Migrant Centre Women's Group because they address women's issues, particularly women who are mothers. So they have, baby and toddler groups, so the women can actually, get out and get a small break from being on their own and interact with other mothers. And while that's going on, they have small workshops to maybe upskill or develop self-confidence. The critical community psychology module focuses on, preparing the students to engage with a community and conducting research in a way where you're equal. You're not actually conducting research on someone, you're working together to develop knowledge. So here when working with the Cork Migrant Centre, so they were teaching us how to make masks, and they actually sent it through the mail, all the materials we needed. And at the same time, we did something called the Cooperative Inquiry, where they would tell us about their journey into Ireland, how they established themselves, how they built confidence, built a lot of skills, and became, I suppose, what would you say, very, they provided a lot of services to Cork, essentially. So rather than, they felt like they combated the negative stereotype that sometimes is associated with migrants, and they felt really happy with themselves. And it was really amazing to learn about, but I suppose our job here is to see where their journey fits in with the research and then to relay it back to them. And in the cooperative inquiry, if you successfully communicate that to the migrants in a way they understand, they should be able to offer their insight and reflect on it as well. So it's in that way, it's a cooperative inquiry. You both build the knowledge together. But actually it was very productive, it was very humane, and in a lot of ways very common sense. Like you gather data together and you make sense of it together in a way that just looking at the literature doesn't provide. If you can bring the literature and the scientific understanding to the community themselves, they have a lot to offer in filling the blanks. So what are some of the anticipated problems? Well, a lot of the women's, English isn't their first language. So we're going to have to drop the academic jargon, maybe create figures so that they can easily keep up with what we're saying. So the big idea is to make sure you can communicate the research or your ideas very clearly so that they can relate back. And that was the idea of balancing up the power dynamic. If we set ourselves up in fancy jargon, you're signaling your academic prestige then, rather than actually collaborating. I suppose what happened a little bit was that some students just got a paper abstract full of jargon and kind of read it out as being related research, but you could just see it didn't really connect to the audience at all. And it wasn't like a moment of conflict, it was just they couldn't really engage with that material or contribute back. So I suppose that was a moment where it really became more evident to me the importance of communicating the research in a way that they can understand and contribute back. So in working with the Cork Migrant Centre, there were some parts of it as part of their experience as migrant women that stood out as unique to them as their social experience in Ireland that I really didn't anticipate. I suppose the first one, it came up during the Cooperative Inquiry while they're telling us their story, and part of the Cooperative Inquiry is we're here to listen, but if a question comes to mind we can ask them. And when they were relaying their story, they're really talking about how important it was that they could develop skills as women, industrious skills, provide to the community, provide services, and how empowering and how good it felt. And they could be more than just a mother. Someone even said, as a human it was important to do this, and then she corrected herself, as a woman it was important to do this. So I kind of asked, I noticed everyone saying as a woman, or even you corrected yourself and emphasized it as a woman. What do you mean by that? And they actually went, where they came from, they had traditional gender roles. The concept of a woman was really different. Whereas in Ireland, there's freedom. They can develop skills. There's no stigma against that. There's no problem with that. They're encouraged to do that. And they actually named their group Saoirse, which is the Irish for freedom, and they chose that for that very reason. So that was one of the big differences where I suppose that social construct of freedom we have that they didn't have access to in their home countries. Did I notice any big differences between the students, and myself included, and the women we were interacting with? I didn't notice any massive differences. There were differences in the journey they relayed and the struggles they had, but actually They were very strong, independent in their own ways. They had great, playful senses of humor. There wasn't anything there. If you had like a stereotype of something that someone of deserving sympathy, they definitely weren't eliciting that. They were just very strong, happy women from what I saw. So I didn't see this big contrast, no. So if I had any advice to give to incoming students to work with communities, I'd say firstly, have an open mind. Don't assume you're going to be working with somebody who wants or needs sympathy, which is, I guess, an assumption I had incorrectly had going in. It was really the opposite, really. They had they wanted to show off how much they've accomplished, like by contrast. So what the CMC kind of makes obvious and has to offer Irish students, it gives you an opportunity to engage with a community while practicing your skills in a very different context. So as for what I've learned after this module, I definitely really learned the importance of sort of certain ethical considerations when you're conducting research in psychology. And the empirical ethical considerations is very much around data collection, do no harm, keep anonymity, very practical considerations. But the research here is very different. It's not just about data collection. It's about engaging with somebody in a very humane way and then trying to see if you can do something about it. In my experience of partnering with the CMC, it did change some of my ideas around research. I was a really, maybe naively strong believer in like the empirical way of, because it's a really heavy word, empirical. It implies you develop a number and it's incredibly valid. And it's, the more you learn about psychology, you kind of learn it's really flawed in a lot of ways. It's not as predictive as it likes to pretend. And actually there's something, the data and information you get in a very humane engagement that you do with this community work, you actually get a much fuller picture of what's important to the community themselves.